future of and what the implications for agriculture are of broadband enhanced technologies and big data, and what that means for us as a sector. And Sam Ziegler is going to play cleanup. He's with Green Seam, and he's going to tell us all about what that is and how broadband and technology and ag can all combine to be a real driver of economic vitality. But Keith's agreed to kick us off, and we'll save a little time at the end. I think what we'll do, if that's okay with everybody, is we'll kind of go hear from our presenters, and then with the time at the end we'll have for some audience interaction. So with that, Keith.
Okay. Thank you, Rosie. Good afternoon. She mentioned Keith Olander. Two things, I guess, from my perspective. I run two farms. I have a 2,500 acre research and demonstration farm near the Staples campus of Central Lakes College, which is part of my position. I personally own and run about 350 acres of farm on that. Aside from that, I've been in education now for 26, 27 years. And I'm going to share a little bit of that, how tech and that integrates with agriculture, but then also education with that. One of my roles is to focus very much on farm business management. We've got about 3,000 farms in the state that are part of that program. It is really heavily focused on finances, and so I'm going to share a little perspective on that. And the reason is, I was having a conversation earlier this morning, we have a lot of technology available, and there's a tremendous opportunity in agriculture as to how we monitor everything that's going into the land for food, to be able to do that. One of the challenges we have right now is the economics in the farm are probably, well, they're certainly at a 25-year low. So if you're a farmer, you're going to determine how to put food on the table versus try to do anything in the technology world to advance the farm. That's really the decision that's being made out there. So that slows that adoption of technology, but ultimately I firmly believe that every farmer has in their heart, how do I maintain my environment and remain viable? Those are the two key points and drivers as we do that. And so where that nexus meets, depending on where economics are, or where environmental availability is, or where I want to impact the environment locally, because they're all looking forward to the next generation of what their children can do on the farm. This is a lot of numbers, but we're going to go through it fairly quickly. I want to just pay attention to a couple things. This is median net farm income in Minnesota. We started in '97 in this track here that we're looking at, and we run it all the way up to 18. And you'll notice there's a fair amount of variability, but a big growth curve as we ramp up into 2012. And then we fell off the cliff. And we're running at a rate right here in this last now 6 years, what we're considering that certainly a recession, if not a depression, in terms of agriculture. So as I mentioned, there's just not a lot of appetite to gather a lot of new technology when you're trying to figure out how to do that. Everything that we're seeing in all enterprises is below cost of production. The other kicker to this is, to put it in your perspective, assuming you're making $100,000 a year in 2012 and your income fell to $40,000 a year. However, all of your input costs, mortgages, everything else stayed the same or continued to rise at 2 to 3%. Those are the finances that are being fought out on the farm as we move forward, and the real reality. The bigger challenge is we fully expect, like when I did farm business management and worked with a number of farmers in '09 and we had this fallout, you expect that on the farm. You expect we're going to have ups and we're going to have downs. But we can manage those. But we have a hard time managing a flat line here when we're not even covering costs. An average family on the farm right now costs about $60,000 a year family living. Not a bad family living in terms of the high demand, right? But when you're only making about $30,000 a year, last year it was $26,055, you got to figure something else out. I.e., off-farm income is over $30,000 a year. So I want you to put that hat on as we look to adoption of technology. You probably can't read all this. This just gives you a national perspective, comparing 11 and 13 to 16, 17. This number right here, we are 76% lower on net farm income. We are the third worst state in the nation. Nevada and Michigan were the two worst. Bottom line, I don't care what state you want to pick here in the Midwest, all of them are down by 2/3 income. And you've seen that out of USDA reports. And in fact, that's where the data comes from here. But it is just that idea that the economy is really suppressing that farm, and so our adoption of technology is just slow. Obviously, broadband is a catalyst to where we can go with agriculture. And I know they're going to touch on this, so I'm going to spend a lot of time. But there's a tremendous amount of automation coming in terms of where we're at with tractors, irrigators, and robotics as it relates to certainly the stuff we see with cattle that's out there. Sensory, this is just phenomenal in terms of what's out there in terms of sensory. Whether it's monitoring all of your grain storage facilities or monitoring all of your animals, there's all that technology available. Again, is it always available when we've got a depressed economy? No. This is an example. I'm going to let Sam actually tell the story. But this is very common what's going on in our fields right now. We map our fields 2 to 3 times a year by everything that we're putting in and everything we're extracting. And that's a tight measurement because you have to be micromanagement in terms of units for that. And some things that we're obviously looking at, overall moisture, fertility, and then pH, which is the acidic level, so we know we've got a cation exchange capacity happening, moving along with that. Things that we work with, obviously the big thing that we have no control over is weather. And as you know, this year has been quite a ride. I personally don't know of another year where we've had a consistent battle. You know, this spring, for those of you that lived in the south, and we did in the some of the north, where we went through all the excess water, and then we came through summer and we battled it some more, and then we get into fall and said, well, maybe the fall will be a little better, and now we realize it's not. Because last week, most of us picked up somewhere between 3 and 8 inches of rain. And so but the bottom line is you look to management in terms of what we're trying to do with technology in this, is all these pieces in terms of crop plans, growing crops, harvest, life work balance, soil health, pest management, and finances, and you put that all together. The thing that I get excited about is where the technology is leading us with the microchips that can be put in the soil that can drive our irrigators, drive our tractors, drive our nutrient requirements. Those are all coming, and they will come with time as we can get to a profitability standpoint in agriculture. Okay, so now I'm going to challenge us with technology. This video is a couple minutes long, but I think it's important that you see it from the standpoint of what is going on in the farms out there. Like I said, we're going to hope that technology is doing what we want here.
Good morning, Terry. Main menu. Weather. Welcome to John Deere Farm Site. Field order. Please prioritize. Work order. Confirmed. Alert. Irrigation. Irrigation system initiated. Incoming call.
Hi, Terry. We're finishing up your planter service. We'll be ready today.
Thanks, Sean. I really appreciate it.
You got it.
Message from Crop Advisor. New prescription transferred. Alert. Weather. Alert. Weather. Changing seed population. Files sent.
I want to stop it there. You guys can go online and Google it yourself to see the balance of it. I just wanted to give you a little bit of a flavor if you haven't been on farms. I'll be honest, this video is just a few years old. And when I originally saw it, I went, well, that's great, you know, that'll be, that's something that's coming. But the reality is these scenarios playing out on the farms right now. And so it really requires that farmer to be in that technology piece. Hopefully everything comes back. Just a couple points I'll wrap up before we move to the next thing. So in education, now when we're working directly with farmers in particular, the idea of the virtual classroom is to how do we are engaging. We're really running into some serious issues because we want them to be able to have full access to software downloads, as you can tell. Just the interaction you saw on that farm is very real. We control a lot of our irrigation pivots via smartphone and be able to collate that data together. And then we want to be able to build maps of field based upon what we did with tillage, what we did with soils, what we did with fertility, what we did with water, chemical, and then harvest, and be able to scrunch that all together and then build profiles off of that. And so this really inhibits our ability to be able to do that. And so we do the best we can with different students in doing that, but the transfer of the records and then to get all this together, you know, in the layers as I talked about, is there, out there, doing that. The other thing, and this isn't necessarily a picture that you can see real well, but it's this idea in precision agriculture, that satellite guidance. This particular setup shows here, notice how these rows as they intersect, they all cut off right off of the angle. And of course, if you're dealing in our world like we do in round pivots, and you got rectangular planters, all of that is GPS guided in terms of what's doing that. That means that we minimize inputs. That means we also minimize inputs when it comes to chemical or fertilizer in the same method. Again, it's all data transfer, and how are we bringing that back? And then I'll end up on drones. This world continues to expand. The one thing I want you to see is from a human perspective, you can never see this in the field. But notice how this is streaking. And this is purposeful because this is one of our research fields. We're doing trials here on different urea applications. But the idea is if you have a problem like this in your field, you can never stand on the edge of the field and be able to do that. So that's great when you can do a drone to do that. The other thing I'm really excited about is we're getting to a point now where we can be very site specific with application of herbicide pesticides. And when we can mitigate use of that, that takes us to a new level. Again, it's all a matter of what technology is there. And then finally, livestock. That's probably the world that's opening up the greatest to us in beef. Imagine if we were to try to figure out if one of them was in estrus, in other words, cycling for breeding, her temperature is typically elevated, or if she's got a cold, right? Either one of those, and we're getting to the point where we can, in technology now, be able to identify that, get their ID, pull them off, treat them accordingly, or breed them. And so that's really some cool stuff as we got that. So, that was a little bit of my flair. I think, are you up next?
Yeah, thank you so much, Keith. And I
Right.
just want to say a quick word about Jim as he comes up here. So, and I appreciate you focusing on, and we've said it the whole time, that as long as you have a broadband connection, right? I mean, all this stuff is great, but absence connectivity, no go. We're going to hear a very different perspective now from Jim Chamberlain. Jim and his wife, Audra, have owned and operated, it's called Island Lake Farm, 170-acre diversified farm and forestry operation kind of near Deerwood, Minnesota. And he's got a couple degrees in ecosystem, silviculture, and natural resource management. He's volunteered and served as on the district committee of the Soil and Water Conservation Districts organization, very much close to my heart as a tree farmer, wannabe tree farmer and landowner. So really glad to have you with us today, Jim. Thanks for being here.
Thanks. Yeah, when Bernadine asked me to speak at a tech conference, it was like, I think you got the wrong guy, because I was like the last person to adopt a smartphone. But I like to say, you know, I've been a gardener my whole life. I got my first blue ribbon at the Anoka County Fair for a vegetable display when I was in 1974. I started looking into organic growing in 1986. I subscribed to organic gardening for the first time. So I've kind of been at this a long time, and for a long time I didn't personally see a vision for large-scale agriculture around, I'll put organic agriculture in quotes, but I'm going to talk, well, I'll go back to this. This is a picture of a farm called Laguna Blanca in Argentina. It was owned by Doug Tompkins, the founder of North Face. And he thought he felt agriculture should be beautiful and more like art. I don't know how Photoshop that is, but touch briefly on some issues that I see in agriculture. Run through soil health definitions and the soil health principles quick, and then some what I see as appropriate technology, with Keith kind of hit for me already. Recent report came out, and we've lost somewhere around 30% of our birds since 1930, or since 1970. Fence row farming might play a role in that. The dead zone in the Gulf of Mexico is the largest ever this year. Major contributor to that is nitrogen from agriculture production. There's 250 dead zones throughout the world. And then this conquest of the land through 7,000 years came out of the Dust Bowl, basically saying that civilizations have thrived and failed throughout history based on how they treat their soil. And then climate change and the challenges that poses. Keith was talking about our rain events that we've had this summer and the challenges that poses to agriculture. And
What's that picture, Jim?
that's a downburst, a rainfall over Phoenix, I believe. And agriculture contributes somewhere around 30% of the greenhouse gases, they figure, that contribute to climate change. Dr. Ratan Lal from Ohio State University makes the claim that we've lost more carbon from our agricultural soils than have been emitted from the burning of fossil fuels since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. So even if we stop burning fossil fuels today, whenever you hear climate change, everybody wants to talk about fossil fuels, but even if we quit burning fossil fuels today, we still have all that carbon in our atmosphere and in our oceans that needs to go somewhere, and the best way to do that is through building soil health. The Natural Resource Conservation Service started a soil health initiative about 8 years ago. This is their definition: the continued capacity of soil to function as a vital living ecosystem. For decades now, agriculture has focused on chemical nutrients and kind of disregarded the biological component of agriculture. Function is the ability to cycle nutrients in water, and 85 to 90% of that is through biology. Why soil health? Increased soil health leads to increased organic matters in your soil profile that allows soil to hold more water, which can help mitigate flooding and makes farming more resilient to drought and to excess rain events. Another reason I think soil health is and one of the big contributors that I see to preventing our adoption of soil health is this synthetic nitrogen, anhydrous ammonia. We use a lot of it. We're kind of addicted to it in our corn bean system. Approximately 30%, even with the best, as I understand, even with the best precision technology we have nowadays, at least 30% of that nitrogen is either off-gassing into the atmosphere or leaching into our groundwaters. By the very nature of anhydrous ammonia, it's toxic to soils and degrades soils. Biological nitrogen, on the other hand, is much slower acting, but it doesn't leach and builds soil structure, soil integrity. This idea that biology is a factor of plant growth isn't new. In 1904, they spoke of this unique population of microorganisms that influence plant growth, or of chemicals released from plant roots that influence plant growth. This, Dr. Lane Ingham calls it plant snot, but about 30% of the photosynthate that a plant produces is exuded out of the roots, and that serves as food for the microbes that are the base of the food chain, mostly bacteria that are in turn eaten by larger organisms and up the food chain, and when those organisms defecate or die, they release nutrients to that plant. And then in 1934, Sir Albert Howard spoke of this fungus that formed a symbiotic relationship with plants and could help plant growth. We've known for 30 years that mycorrhizae fungi can take phosphorus in an unusable form and feed it to the plants in a usable form in exchange for carbohydrates from the plant. These are the soil health principles recognized by the Natural Resource Conservation Service and others. Minimize disturbance. I'm going to go through these really quick. Minimize disturbance. Anytime you till the soil, you expose soil to erosion, and you disturb that structure for the microorganisms in the soil. Basically like a tornado hitting your house. If you got hit by a tornado once in your life, you'd probably be all right. You'd rebuild. If that happened 3 times a summer, you'd be in trouble. I used to plow 3 times. I used to till 3 or 4 times a summer in my garden regularly to control weeds. And then pesticides and herbicides. We know they influence the microbial community, the microbiome in the soil, but we don't know how and what's acceptable and what's not. They can be valuable tools. There's no argument there. Keep the soil armored. I spell it with a U because it sounds stronger. It's that important. Keep soil covered. Nature abhors a vacuum. You very seldom see bare soil in our temperate climates. Soil organisms are just like us. They don't like it too hot. They don't like it too cold. Bare soil can be as much as 60 degrees hotter on a sunny day as soil covered with vegetation. Helps hold moisture in the soil, prevents evaporation, and prevents erosion. Keeping living roots in the soil, back to that plant exudate. In a lot of our agricultural landscapes, we have bare soil for as much as 7 or 8 months out of the year. There's no plant exudate for those microbes to eat, and the microbiome collapses. Increasing diversity, different plants give off different types of plant exudate that feed different types of microorganisms. So the more diverse your plant community is above ground, the more diverse your plant community is going to be below ground. And then the last one that took a while for NRCS to adopt this, but it is now on their website, is integrate livestock. Mimicking those large herds of ruminants that used to run our landscape. Our most fertile landscapes, our prairies and our savanna ecosystems were all developed under large herds of migratory animals that would graze heavily and then move on and not come back for a year or maybe 2. This is a little dung beetle. That's the pinnacle of grazing. If your pasture has dung beetles, there's some 30 species in Minnesota that catalog. And if you have dung beetles, multiple species of dung beetles, you've started to reach your pinnacle of grazing. They basically take the manure and drag it underground, and then they lay their eggs in it, their offspring hatch in it, and fertilize the soil.
And so you want that?
You want that.
Okay.
Yep, dung beetles are a good thing.
Just not in your bed?
Not in your bed. I don't think they last long in your bed. Anybody heard of the Microbiome Project, where they went around and did genetic sequencing around the world and found that soils are related on different continents? Through this process, some 27,000 samples, some 2 billion DNA sequencing, they found that soil is by far the most complex and least understood microbiome on the planet. And how's technology doing? How's technology advancing things like soil testing to determine this biological component? Soil respiration, scientists have been measuring soil respiration since 1860. It's just within the last decade or 2 that they've figured out how to do it. They say they figured out how to do it cost effectively and accurately to determine the level of biologically available nitrogen. Basically, microorganisms breathe in oxygen, give off carbon dioxide, and if you can measure that rate, it gives you a clue as to how alive your soil is, and then that transfers over to an available nitrogen. Universities aren't quite accepting this yet, but it's out there, and it's a tool that farmers are using. And then the hay takes that soil respiration and some carbon and nitrogen information and future cropping and determines the biologically available NP and K. I think some of the e-tools like this Smart Mix calculator for determining cover crop mixes. You punch in your location and your seeding window and some of the goals that you're trying to do, whether you're trying to increase organic matter or attract pollinators, whatever your goals are for that cover crop, and it'll spit out a list of seed mixes, and then you can determine which ones you want, and they'll give you a ratio, and the company will sell you the seed too. And then YouTube videos, online learning, farmers using that stuff more and more, webinars, podcasts, that kind of thing. And then farmer-to-farmer networking has been a huge thing on this farmer-to-farmer knowledge and sharing. Has been a huge thing around this cover crops thing and soil health. This Facebook page, I just find it fantastic. There's some 3,000 members on that group, and somebody will post a question about a cover crop mix or something, and within an hour there'll be 20 or 30 comments, people sharing knowledge and information. Keith mentioned the Fitbit for cows, some of that kind of stuff to get livestock back on the land, the drones that Keith talked about. This is a pretty cool app called Pasture Map, where you can plug in the size of your paddock and measure your forage that's available, and it'll tell you how many animals you can put on the land and for how long and how big your paddock needs to be, that kind of thing. And then technology like these polywire fences that can be electrical fences. They're polywire with woven with strands of stainless steel woven into them. So you can take them up and put them down a quarter-mile fence in 15 minutes. I would have took our grandparents, 3 weeks to build a fence that long. So they can be adaptable and movable. Social media or e-commerce, I guess maybe. I'm sure Sam's going to hit on this a lot more than I will and knows a lot more about it. On our farm, our major social e-commerce is Facebook, and it seems to work pretty good for us. And then one that I think is, Keith touched on this quite a bit, this autonomous vehicles. I just remember my dad grew up on a farm in North Dakota, and he talked about sitting on the tractor for hours and hours, all day for weeks. He'd be out cultivating corn on the Alice Chalmers, and then they got lights. And then he didn't get to quit when it got dark. And I think that's why agriculture's gotten bigger, why equipment's gotten bigger, is because people don't want to sit on tractors. If you can make your equipment twice as big, that's half the time you got to spend on that tractor. So can we get autonomous vehicles that can re-diversify our landscapes and implement these agroforestry practices that are diverse and productive and resilient, where you're growing tree crops and green crops or forage crops together. This is a picture of New Forest Farms in southwest Wisconsin, where a gentleman by the name of Mark Shepard took this 107-acre degraded cornfield and planted alley cropping systems on it, where he has trees and forage and grazes livestock through it. But can we do things like this and use autonomous vehicles to help manage those lands and the technology that comes with it? I debated whether I should put this up there, but is it the right technology to spray a chemical that we know is harmful to soil? I think it's a tool to get us where we need to be, but I think we need to break our addiction to nitrogen. The only way we can do that is implementing the soil health principles. And then things like genetically modified organisms. I know there's good reasons for genetically modified organisms, but things like the corn borer, they genetically modified that with the BT toxin that kills any worms, Lepidoptera. It's been shown to affect nematode populations in the soil. Kind of takes away the whole idea of integrated pest management in my mind. So, I think technology, this is my personal opinion, I think technology has a huge role to play in the future of agriculture, but I think our environment needs to come first, and it has to be the appropriate technology for the right reason.
Could you go back one slide and tell us, and just talk us through the modified, the genetically modified?
So BT is a
but what's the,
this one?
walk us through the, I guess I
Cycle
can't
of that
quite.
one on the right. So what's that showing?
So they genetically modify the corn so it contains a bacterium called Bacillus thuringiensis. It's an organic herbicide or insecticide that organic farmers have been certified for organic farming for years. It's a natural insecticide that only kills very specific species, mostly worms, Lepidoptera family. So that's bred into the corn. So when the European corn borer eats the corn or the leaves, it will ingest that bacterium, and basically what it does is it paralyzes their stomach and they die. Does that help?
Yeah, okay, I thought, because I was looking for, I'm remembering what happened after all of that stuff, and how it destroyed all the other insects that we needed, and
I personally think anhydrous is a much bigger issue in our agricultural systems than genetic modification.
Thank you, Jim, so much. And we're next going to hear from Sam. I just wanted to note that Sam also is a farmer. He's a fourth generation owner and operator of Ziegler Farms near Good Thunder. And he comes to his current position out of a gig with the Soybean Research and Promotion Council and Minnesota Soybean Growers Association. So those are his ag groups.
Awesome. Thanks for having me. I'm going to try to keep this a little bit short so we can have some questions with everybody here. But happy to talk about technology. A couple things to start with is just to put things in perspective. The map that you see on the left is stories that you see around the U.S., but you can also see that around the world when you look at the number on the right. There's a continuation of people leaving rural America to go to major urban centers. It's no different here than it is other places, but how that affects and why, it's really to some of this topic. Can we offer the same things in rural that you can in urban? And broadband is a great example of that. Also want to get you thinking, to think about, if we look at the top left map, and you think about the world population today, what would the world look like? You'd see Africa, you'd see Central America, you'd see Asia, completely, major India and China, huge Southeast Asia, 25% of the world's population alone in Southeast Asia, and you'll see the U.S., Canada's almost gone, Russia's gone, South America starts to dwindle. So think about where are the people that need, the question that was asked or that was mentioned in our briefing here is, how does agriculture affect the future? How do we provide the food, the fiber, the fuel, the feed for the world? Now, look at the map on your right, and that's the land quality assessment that USDA has done many years ago. Where you see white, it's really non-productive, okay? Where you see green, it's highly productive. Where you see red, there's challenges. It's hard to see from back there, but there's not a lot of green, okay? But where the green is, we are, okay? So bringing it back home, right? I mean, here we are up here right now. I mean, we're growing stuff, but as far as in a bigger picture and scope, right here in the U.S., the heartland, the Mississippi River Valley, and some other areas are growing more food per acre, more acres in the region than most parts of the world when you start looking at a map like this, that you see China here, and Asia, and India, and Africa, that their land quality is not so good. A lot of mountains. This is all mountains and deserts, right? Up through here, all mountains and deserts. You can't produce things on that. Not very well. And so how does agriculture, how do we that we're living in this zone, we're living in Minnesota, in this upper valley that has a lot of opportunity to produce things. How do we do a better job at it? How do we meet the going to 9 billion people, forecast as high as 11 million, right? So what I want to think about is just give you a little recap of what Green Seam is. But Green Seam started by private and public sector in southern Minnesota to say, you know what, when we look at what we're already doing here, and you look at the density of ag bioscience, 65% of the total state of Minnesota's ag bioscience happens in southern Minnesota. Okay? If you look at some of the facts I'll get into, but there's solution centers that are across the world. We're already a solution center, it's just people don't realize how much we have to impact solutions of agriculture. From the technology side, through the processing, all the way to the growers, and having people a lot smarter than me that's thinking, how do we change in regards to our soil and do things on production differently. Green Seam is trying to be a solution center, to be recognized at the same level that they are. If you want to be involved in the food ag system, you should be in this region because we're doing a really good job already. The name started from the standpoint of these maps. The green density shows that we are really highly productive. If you look at a renewable fuels map, you'll see that Minnesota helps start ethanol, helps start biodiesel, and of course has a lot of wind and other things that fit into our rural landscape. And Seam was, we have to do this together. This isn't one nonprofit entity like myself that's going to change all this. The brand was built for the community to leverage on, just as you think about the question, how many towns can you name in the Silicon Valley? Okay? You won't be able to name very many towns in Silicon Valley. We don't have to name all the names within the Green Seam region, but to know this is a place that we can help solve some of these challenges. Now, before I get into some of the questions that were asked about how does this fit in technology, this is some of the things that we're working on. How do we retain businesses and help them grow? How do we attract and create new ones? This is a huge technology space. But it's going to take the talent side that Keith is working on, and it's going to take people to know about us that we're here, which fits into even some of the social media stuff that people follow. A lot of farms today. We have a lot of farmers in Minnesota that are hitting millions of hits on Twitter and YouTube, Millennial Farmer, and all kinds of others that you might know about Peterson Brothers. So all those come into play. So as I get into this, we're already sitting at over 950 businesses on the green seam, which directly represent 28% of the entire workforce in our region. But people don't always connect agriculture and farmers with Main Street. But we're all in this together. We're all, so 28% of people in southern Minnesota are working in ag. $36 billion in economic activity. It's our driver. So how can we advance this? And the technology is here. So here's 4 businesses in southern Minnesota that have really taken off and really added something. Sparebolt Foods, all about technology. Revel Greens, indoor growing. Alcorn Renewable Fuels, and Acre, a web platform I'll talk about a little bit. But all those that we've been impactful to help them make sure that they're moving forward. But they all rely on technology. Not one of them, if we pulled broadband, fiber type of thing out of them, would they function the way they could. So before I get into that one, I want to follow up on Keith's note, and it's working so far. So as it said, I farm, so just happen to be, I'm here and not on the field today, and you can kind of see on here, but our combine is going right now, capturing all this data, okay? So that's on my farm right now. The combine's going down the field, and I can monitor that. This is cool, but what's really cool is the data that's coming from this, that we're able to make changes in our farm real time, year to year, that we never could before. So our monitors all have computers in them, basically computers and memory storage, and now they're being full. So we're having to download data off in the middle of the season, where when we first started technology in ag, you could run that memory in the combine would stay for 3-4 years. The amount of data that we're having off the farm, from the farm and from sensors today is enormous. So one of the number one career items right now is data analytics for agriculture. Artificial intelligence, to be able to tell what disease is that without having to have augmented reality of that agronomist or an intern be able to go look at that crop and then say, hey, I need some additional additional opinion on this without somebody having to drive out to a remote area. Augmented reality. But it all coming down to data. We're collecting data and we're figuring out how to use it, but some of the data I don't even know how to use today yet as a farmer, and we got to make it usable. But all this, we're paying off of cell phone service today. That's how we're operating our farm. We get very large pixels, so we're not able to drill into the level that we want to drill into. So the technology and the broadband are critical to seeing this go much farther beyond this. My kids hate it when I tell them to quit using the data this time of year because there's none left for the farm. So, HertzStar, a company that's all about remote access to facilities across the world. Actually, they're based out of Mankato, but they're sold across the world. They're measuring the feed bins, measuring the weight of how much feed is left in the grain bin of those turkey barns, those poultry barns, to see, because an animal just like you will stop eating when you're sick before you stop anything else, before you give any other signs. You're not hungry. All those things show up. But they're challenged with, so a real story I talked to them, they said they have 2 customers yet with dial-up. And then they have customers that they're using cell phone tower, and then they have the customer directed towards fiber. And they're having to try to meet all those customers' needs, because one farmer might have multiple locations, and each one of those locations they don't have access to the same technology. So it's expensive because you're deploying multiple things. But it's the same, all this is, we collect the data at a sensor, and then we have to transfer it somehow to get it to where somebody can use it. And somebody can access it, somebody can use that information for prediction, for response, for changing something. So HertzStar BinTrack, a cool company, and there's a video from KSTP. I won't show it, but if you Google Poultry Patrol, look at their website, there's a really cool video. It's a startup that we've been helping, and they are basically, you can almost call it facial recognitions for turkeys. And the whole concept of that is recognize that it's a bird, then recognize, is there a temperature change? Is it healthy? Is it mobile? Is it everything about it? And so they're in the final 4 for a $500,000 McDonald's grant right now. And the video will show a piece of equipment like in that top corner that's going down through the barn slowly, and then these little images, actually the video don't show the images, but the video will show it actually moving through a barn. But there's 4 or 5 boxes around each one of these turkeys that they're trying to perfect, and each colored box represents a different thing they're trying to understand about that bird. There is facial recognition for cows that is already a platform that you can purchase instead of monitoring by a collar or a tag system like a Fitbit. That is actually facial recognition. How much are they eating a day? How much are they drinking? How much are they moving? What's their attitude? Is your head low? It's kind of like us. If you're kind of dragging, you don't feel very good, right? It's the same concept, but how can AI help us get there? But all this is going to take data to get back to some system to be able to monitor it. This leads in really well to what Jim's talking about is the food system now is starting to try to figure out, okay, the farmer with a commodity price is hard to change and make different principles or practice when they're paid on quantity. But if consumers truly want a better food, if they want a different type of production method, if they want something, then how do they pay for it? Land O'Lakes has a system now to monitor sustainability on particular farms. But again, all that's from data collection, from the farmer, from the food supply end, and trying to max it to show the producer what can they do. Again, it's back to there's data being collected, but we need to have technology. Some fun little quotes that talk about increased production of crops and ending nutrient overuse and different things like that could increase production by 30%, but this is going to take technology. These different farming practices could save $2.3 trillion. It's just, you got to make that one happen. And forecasters that talk about the data analytics has spiked already in the last couple of years and will projected to be $1.23 billion industry in just a couple of years from now, and I don't doubt that a bit. So the question is agriculture is ready for technology, but will technology be ready for us? Will the infrastructure be there? And so to see all of you smart faces around the table here in the conference today talking about how can their county get them lines built to those last miles is really, really important. The quote I had to get fiber to my house was $40,000 plus the subscription fee. Now I can eat some of that, but I can't eat the $300 service fees on top of that every month to have high speed and et cetera. So I'm excited the conversation. I know the county I'm from, Blue Earth County, has received just recently a Blandin feasibility study funding and grant, and I know they were here at the conference. They were trying to figure out, where does that county go? So I'm excited for ag. I think there's a ton of things that can come to our farms, to our communities, and drive our economic prosperity in the state of Minnesota. But I think that we're really at the times where the copper telephone wire is not important anymore. That is fiber and getting it out there to those farms. So with that, looks like now we've combined 18 acres in that field and 11% moisture right now. So with that, I'd love to have questions if we have time for it. But
yeah, wow, that was something, huh? That was so interesting. And I was watching the faces of your panelists. People were just rapt. It is 3:15, and we have a keynote presentation in 15 minutes or 3:30. So I'm sorry about what I'm